colleagues, good morning, good afternoon. We hope that you and your families are all well in these unprecedented times. On behalf of PULSAR team and the WorldBank, and despite the ongoing circumstances, we are happy to welcome you to our third joint FinCoP EduCoP workshop entitled Financial Reporting and Consolidation in Times of COVID. I would like to remind you that all presentations, including their translations, are available in the document section of the platform, which you could see on the right side of your screens. Today is a very special session for us, not only because we have a pleasure to welcome Ed Olowo-Ekeri, our Governance Global Director, but also because two of our PULSAR colleagues will be presenting their country's experience in handling financial reporting and consolidation in these hard times. Without further ado, and giving our ambitious agenda, I pass the floor to Danielle Boyce, Practice Manager for the Governance Team for East Europe and Central Asia. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dimitri. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of the World Bank and the PULSAR team to this second of a series of joint FinCoP and EduCoP virtual workshops, also known as the SMART Interactive Talks. Today's topic is the financial reporting and consolidation in times of COVID-19. First, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time in your schedules to attend this event. I know our schedules are not the same as they used to be, and we hope all of you and your families are doing well. As you may know, and as you are probably experiencing in your daily work, the timely preparation of the interim and annual financial statements and their consolidation is one of the key elements of the sound financial management. And sometimes the consolidation part can be one of the most difficult. Reliable and comparable financial reporting is also critical for enabling governments to make timely decisions and to carry out their financial planning, as well as to ensure proper levels of transparency and accountability, especially when you are operating in uncertain times like we are right now. The main objective of this virtual workshop is to, main two objectives really are first to discuss the international good practices of preparation and consolidation of financial statements in times of emergencies such as the ongoing pandemic. And secondly, to showcase countries that, as Dimitri mentioned, in addressing these issues. So we'll hear first from quite an extraordinary panel of experts, starting with a keynote address from Edward Olowo-Ekeri, our Governance Global Director in the World Bank, who will highlight the role of financial reporting and overall governance and institutional responses. Then Thomas Müller-Marcus-Berger. Hello, Thomas. Good to see you again. Partner and global leader for international public sector accounting in EY, who's also the IPSAS-B Consultative Advisory Group Chair, will share with us some of his reflections and recommendations on this topic. Livia Shin-Strakova from Eurostat's EPSAS team will present the EU experience in addressing financial reporting concerns during this new context that we're working in. Anton Dubovcik who is deputy head of the Russian Federation's Federal Treasury, will share the experience of Russia in this. And then we will have presentations from PULSAR colleagues Hanna Zorochik and Ludmila Haponenko, who will respectively present Croatia and Ukraine's experiences in handling financial reporting and consolidation functions during the ongoing crisis. Finally, then we'll have a short Q&A session led by Srinivas Gurusara and Patrick Umatata, and then brief closing remarks from Arman Bhatyan on behalf of the PULSAR team. Finally, you might have noticed that today we also have simultaneous translation into Spanish. I haven't tested that myself, but maybe I will later, because we have several accountants general from Latin American countries who were very interested in this event and they wanted to also further exchange experiences in public sector accounting practices between both regions. In fact, as you've probably heard, some of you in PULSAR, there's a similar network in the Latin American Caribbean region called FOCAL. So thanks again for being with us today. We hope you enjoy this event. And with this, I declare the event is open and hand it back over to Dimitri to continue with the further proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Now I would like to pass the floor to Ed, who will share with us some reflection on the role of financial reporting and balance sheet approach in general, and Debt Service Suspension Initiative, also known as DSSI, promoted by the Group of 20. Go ahead, Ed.
Thanks, Dimitri, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Nice to see you all. And a special welcome to Thomas. It's nice to see you after this while. I'm really delighted to join this event today. A smart interactive talk on financial reporting and consolidation. I was hoping to see you all in person at the May 2020 event in Belarus, because that was the original plan and I was scheduled to participate. But as you know, the event was postponed due to COVID-19. It is a great pleasure to be able to connect with you virtually now, and I hope we will have opportunities to connect in person in the near future. I'm glad to know that PULSAR has adapted very well to a virtual format. And I believe that the regular events are useful to all the participants. I want to begin by congratulating the PULSAR team for making this possible. Also, I want to thank all of you for your enthusiastic support and strong participation. I would encourage all of you to make the best use of these events through your questions and interactions. This is really a good time for consolidation of knowledge and learning. I understand that many of you have successfully gone through the face-to-face IPSAS training of trainers program conducted under PULSAR by ACCA. This is also a good time to complete the IPSAS certification online exam if you have not already done so. With that said, let me now put today's session in context. COVID-19, as you know, has brought a new reality beyond what we could have imagined. Every day, we hear news about the increasing number of people infected globally and the effect that this pandemic is having on families, societies, and economies. So the pandemic calls for fast, creative, effective, inclusive, and accountable governments. However, governments themselves are directly impacted with the virus-containing measures, such as lockdown and social distancing. This is preventing the public service from working at normal capacity, while there is a greater need for delivery of essential public services. Among other things, governments need to reallocate public resources and mitigate risks of fraud and corruption. They need to ensure continuity of employment, transparency around decision-making, and also have close engagement with citizens and businesses. Furthermore, at a time when governments have to rely on social compliance to fight the pandemic, and citizens and businesses rely on government crisis response, mistrust in government could become a serious issue in many countries. In fact, it could render government's response ineffective. However, financial information produced by the governments could be one of the means to minimize the mistrust, while also enabling effective decision-making by governments. So the work that you are doing on financial reporting is really critical at this point in time. COVID-19 as you know, is wreaking havoc on economies across the world. The economic shutdown across most countries resulting from the virus containment measures has accentuated the economic crisis. Latest estimates suggest that the global economy is already in a recession, with the global GDP in 2020 projected to decline by about 4.9%. As a foremost development institution, the World Bank has been supporting client countries across the world with finance and policy advice. Over the past 3 months, the World Bank Group has mounted the fastest crisis in response in its history. We are now financing emergency operations in over 100 countries, which is home to about 70% of the global population. And the total support is expected to be to the tune of $150 billion over the next 12 months. These programs reinforce healthcare systems, protect the poorest households, save jobs and businesses, and get money to people who need it the most. We have also been producing a series of policy papers on a wide range of topics. I'll limit our examples this afternoon or morning to the area of governance, where we have produced policy papers on agile treasuries, state continuity, anti-corruption, resource mobilization in COVID-19 context. There are more still in the pipeline, and soon we will be releasing a paper on financial reporting during COVID-19. I understand that you had a good session on this particular topic a few days earlier under the PULSAR program. I encourage all of you to read this just-in-time publication of the governance global practice of the World Bank. Now, let me turn to the issue of debts. Governments across the globe are piling up debts, and their balance sheets are trending to negative net worth. Governments' debt to GDP ratio are going up to 100% or beyond in some countries, which is normally treated as unhealthy. Following the recent G20 decision on debt service suspension initiative, the World Bank developed a one-stop shop database relating to sovereign debts to provide information relating to debt of several low and middle income countries. Debt service suspension with broad and equitable participation will allow low income countries to concentrate their resources on fighting the pandemic. Because the debt service payments that they will be suspending, they will be able to retain those resources and use them for the crisis response. The World Bank, along with the IMF, are tasked to support the implementation of the debt service suspension initiative by monitoring spending, enhancing public debt transparency, and ensuring prudent borrowing during this period. A key objective of the debt service suspension initiative is to enable an effective crisis response. Countries therefore have to commit to use freed up resources to increase social, health, or economic spending in response to COVID-19. Countries also commit to disclose all public sector financial commitments involving debt and debt-like instruments. As we work on this agenda, one thing has become very clear, that the debt service suspension initiative monitoring, reporting, and transparency would have been easy and effective had countries implemented accrual basis of accounting and consolidated the financial statements of all their controlled entities. As a result of this inadequate accounting and financial reporting practices by countries, governments now have to collect information outside the normal accounting and financial reporting systems, to know the full fiscal space created by debt service suspension, and how this is being used. And you have to also appreciate the fact that when this information is collected outside the normal accounting and financial reporting systems, it means they are not audited. So you can't be sure of the accuracy of this information. Now, sound data on public financial commitments will improve assessments of debt sustainability and financial needs. Greater debt transparency is critical to help countries make more informed borrowing and investment decisions and to attract foreign direct investments. The emergence of the pandemic and debt service suspension initiative has therefore brought into focus the emphasis on all of government financial reporting and consolidation using robust accounting and reporting standards, especially IPSAS accrual. I therefore look forward to listening to the experiences of several experts today. The deliberations that you will be having today will also feed into our broader effort towards debt transparency using improved government financial reporting. I thank all our guest speakers who have kindly agreed to participate and share their experiences. Also, my appreciation to Dan Boyce, the practice manager, and the entire PULSAR team for putting together such an interesting and timely event. Also, many thanks to all of you for participating in this event. There cannot be an event without participants. So thank you, stay well, and stay safe, and enjoy the event. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today, Ed. Now I would like to invite Thomas to share his thoughts on general implications of the pandemic, main types of government interventions during the crisis, and some relevant IPSAs that could be helpful address most of the issues arising from the current situation.
I hope you can see my screen. Can please somebody confirm that he can see my screen?
Yes, I can see colleagues. You can change your mode to presentation.
Dear Thomas, I'm sorry, before you start, I'd like again to tell our participants that the translation of this presentation is available in the documents on the right-hand side. The name is FinRep IPSAS B, and you can download it in your preferred language in order to follow the presentation. I'm sorry for interruption, and thank you.
No. Thanks, Terry, for making that clear. I think it helps a lot. So let me start by thanking first for the invite to this really important session, and thanks for the great introduction of Ed. I think he already mentioned a couple of issues which I want to mention in my presentation as well. So it couldn't be a better lead into my presentation. Thanks again for that, Ed. I want to cover in the next 15 minutes 3 areas. First of all, shortly, the general implications of COVID-19, divided into short-term challenges and long-term challenges. Cover shortly, kind of as a structure, the main types of government interventions before I highlight some of the relevant IPSAs in this context of how to report on the measures being taken by governments. I will use some examples in my presentation. I know most of the governments, numerous governments, have taken great measures, and great examples are to be seen worldwide. So forgive me if your country is not being mentioned. I just picked some which came to my attention, just to give some examples. That doesn't mean that this is an exclusive list. I know there are great examples out there. So with that, let me start on the short-term challenges, the general implications. And I think what we already see is regarding the kind of both the financial statements for the year 2019, but also the quarterly financial statements and quarterly reporting, that the current situation might require relaxed reporting deadlines for entities and a clear focus on user-critical information. We already see that there is a staff shortage in some countries when it comes to the reporting requirements or responding to reporting requirements. So there are countries like Poland or France which have already done an extension of 2 to 3 months to the respective reporting deadlines for governmental reporting, both the entities but also the government itself. The next point, also mentioned already by Ed, governments had to respond very quickly, and they did so in kind of an extraordinary way to these extraordinary challenges. I think if you look at the difference between the 28-29 financial crisis and the current COVID-19 crisis, then one of the biggest differences is certainly that there was no ramp-up time. There was no time to plan and react. It was really abrupt, and therefore many governments had to respond on a very quick basis. This has resulted, obviously, in some relaxed pre-transaction controls, and therefore it is one of the short-term challenges to implement effective retrospective checks in order to kind of trace how the funds were used. And talking about tracing, I think it is very important that all measures are already kind of covered in budgeting, to include the measures already in budgeting in some form. And there are governments to be seen worldwide which kind of following the advice of the IMF, but also others like WorldBank. Many countries such as Colombia or Uruguay have created specific emergency funds or at least specific budget items for COVID-19 expenditures so that it is easier to obtain budgetary reports and financial information tracing this expenditure. Italy, for example, has centralized many COVID-19 measures with the National Emergency Fund, which has been refinanced with a total of 1.7 billion euro. And the government of Chile has centralized all available funds within central government in the national treasury. So this allows to kind of implement then the retrospective controls on significant amounts which were kind of paid out. Third point to mention certainly are the reporting and auditing impacts which are to be expected. And there are kind of 4 which I just want to mention. First of all, certainly the potential delays due to staff shortages. Just to give you a heads up of what happened in Germany, just for the payout of the German Employment Agency when it comes to the short-term work compensation, which was 10.2 million employees until end of April 2020. The German government had to kind of centralize 8,500 civil servants from other agencies into the German Employment Agency only to cover this measure. So you see that there will be staff shortages in agencies, in governmental entities, and this will certainly lead to significant delays. The second point is the increased uncertainty and risk in certain areas and in respect of going concern of certain entities, especially for quasi-public sector entities, which are depending on subsidiaries and grants. And there need to be kind of some considerations and some advice, some guidance, how to kind of assess this going concern and how to respond to that. I will come to that in a second. Third point, the uncertainty on how to report post-balance sheet events and contingencies, especially for 2019, but also for Q1. Some of the issues are post-balance sheet events, and the question is just how to deal with that and with the contingencies which are kind of introduced into the balance sheet by the measures. I will kind of give some examples and highlight that in a little bit more detail. And last but not least, obviously, additional disclosures are required in the management reporting, especially concerning prognostic elements and some kind of the disclosures regarding the post-balance sheet events as well. And here to give some examples as well, some governments already responded to the risks incurred within their 2019 reporting. In Poland, for example, the Ministry of Finance has issued a document on the preparation and audit of the 2019 financial statements during the pandemic to all its entities and agencies. The communication includes practical guidelines such as going concern or events after the reporting period. And furthermore, the Ministry of Finance created a dedicated webpage containing frequently asked questions and answers relating to the preparation of financial statements during the pandemic, especially focusing on how to record for the support measures taken by public entities in the framework of the Polish anti-crisis shield. Looking outside the EU, the government of Colombia, for example, already in their 2019 consolidated financial statements provided disclosures regarding the COVID-19 impact on the 2020 annual accounts. So already forward-looking what public has to expect regarding the 2020 accounts, which is certainly a kind of a good example and one of the best practices. And last but not least, the government of Costa Rica created a new disclosure format for all public sector institutions on the impact of COVID, with the first statements being prepared according to this reporting framework for the second quarter of 2020. So you see a lot of guidance is needed and is already out there prepared by governments. With that, let me come to the long-term challenges. Ed has already mentioned that an active management of government's balance sheet is needed as the measures dramatically increase both public sector assets and liabilities. It is therefore necessary to kind of both sides strengthen the active asset management, which means identifying surplus assets, which means assets which are no longer needed for service provisions. There might be some changes for some agencies in the service provision which is kind of perhaps no longer affordable. Identifying these assets, make decisions how to treat with that, do active asset management. For those assets which are kind of still on the balance sheet, there needs to be procedures to monitor the impairment needs. In many cases, especially for financial assets, and I come to that in a second, there might be the need for an impairment and to consider the kind of the fair value of these assets looking forward. On the liability side, it's really important especially to establish procedures and processes to manage loans and guarantees, which means a close monitoring of default risk of loans provided and an increased probability of being claimed on guarantees. If you see, only Germany has provided guarantees for businesses in the amount of 820 billion euro. And due to the relaxed controls and the likely global recession, there is a high risk of default, which might turn into kind of a liability on the government's balance sheet. Post-crisis, public sector finances will need to be restored and economies will need a kickstart. And this has already been mentioned by Ed, the public needs to be on board for hard decisions to be made. What is necessary here is transparent public information, and there are already good examples outside or out there in the world. In the UK, for example, the government website on government efficiency, transparency and accountability contains a detailed description on COVID-19 related measures taken by government. And another example is the government of New Zealand, which increased on one side the release frequency of some of its regular data and commentary and developed new commentary focused specifically on the impact of COVID-19 on the economy. And furthermore, a new COVID-19 economic dashboard provides a range of real-time data designed to support independent analysis and give businesses a sense of the activity across different parts of the economy. Obviously, there is a need to monitor the effectiveness of the measures taken, corrections to be made, and therefore it is necessary that governments implement kind of a performance audit as well to assess the economy, efficiency, and effectiveness of the measures taken. And a good example, again, is the government of New Zealand, where the Treasury is working currently on measuring the effectiveness of the COVID-19 related spending to inform decisions about further short to medium measures that may be necessary. Obviously, at the moment, it is not the right time to stop public finance management reforms. And this has been mentioned by Ed as well. Why? Obviously, governments will need a record level of borrowing, much of it from open markets. And investors will want to see timely, reliable, and comparable information, which kind of increases the need for robust accruals-based accounts, which provide the necessary foundation, number one, and number two, to the use of internationally accepted public sector accounting standards, which is IPSAS, which provide credibility and trust. And with that, I'm coming to the second part of the presentation very shortly. There are 4 interventions or types of interventions, which you can see in all government programs out there. There is direct government expenditure, there is support for individuals, there is support for businesses, and there is support for financial systems. And this is the structure which was kind of leading the development of an IPSAS-B staff question and answer paper on how to account for COVID-19. And the following is just very quickly summarizing that. If you look at direct government expenditures, interventions are considered collective and individual services from an accounting perspective, provided to address the needs of society as a whole. From the perspective of IPSAS, such services are accounted for under the standard of IPSAS 19, typically as expenses when the services are provided. Furthermore, some interventions may also result in provisions or contingent liabilities which require recognition or disclosure, and we will see a little bit more on that on the following slide. If we talk about support, direct support for individuals, then certain cash transfers to individuals or households, such as unemployment benefits or minimum income guarantees, are to be accounted for within the scope of IPSAS 42, which is social benefits. Such benefits are recorded and recognized as an expense and a liability under 2 conditions. The first condition is the entity has a present obligation for an outflow of resources. And second, the obligation is reliably measurable. In practical terms, that normally means that you have only a liability, or to recognize a liability, for the next payment, which is already kind of agreed with the recipient. If a public sector entity needs to restructure its operations, which might happen in a lot of countries as a result of COVID-19, certain restructuring provisions fall within the scope of IPSAS 19, which is, again, provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets. If we talk about additional sick leave and redundancy payments provided to public sector entities' own employees, so we are changing the perspective here, coming from citizens to public sector entities' own employees, then those are accounted for under IPSAS 39, which is employee benefits. Typically, additional sick leave, which is provided as a help, is recognized as an expense when the absence occurs, so there's no liability before that. And redundancy payments and termination benefits are kind of recognized as a provision when the employer can no longer withdraw the offer of these benefits. That brings me to the third group of interventions, which is support for businesses and other public sector entities. It has already been mentioned that consolidation is the instrument in order to get the full picture of what happens in the area of governments and what the economic result of the interventions are. In many countries, new government entities have been established as a result of COVID-19. Might it be funds, might it be legal entities, in order to respond and concentrate the response, as I have already outlined. In other cases, there are potential changes in control when kind of an intervention is being given by taking over shares and by that taking over control. You might recognize or remember the example of Lufthansa in Germany, which doesn't lead to a change in control, but a significant influence of the German government in Lufthansa in order to kind of allow a going concern of this entity. So what does that mean? Various government interventions obviously result in interest in other entities, and these equity investments and convertible loans could result in either obtaining control, which then has to be consolidated under the auspices of IPSAS 35, or it can lead to joint control or significant influence, which has to be recorded for under IPSAS 36 and IPSAS 37. Regardless what case we are talking about, IPSAS 38 in any case requires disclosures about these measures being given. Furthermore, a government may provide financial guarantees on the debt, on the default of debt owed by businesses. I already alluded to that in the case of Germany, and these guarantees have to be closely monitored under the regime of IPSAS 41, where financial guarantees have to be recognized at fair value if there is a probability of an outflow. But even if there's not yet a probability of an outflow of cash, then IPSAS 19 requires disclosure regarding these guarantees and the probability assessment of these outflows. A procedure and a process has to be installed, though, for monitoring these guarantees going forward, because a guarantee which is not dangerous for government now can get dangerous in the future. Talking about the future, just very briefly mention ED 72 and ED 71, which are these standards which the board is working on regarding transfer expenses. This might become relevant once they are published and approved by the board. And last slide, support for financial statements. Obviously, IPSAS 28, 29, and 30 are the standards which provide guidance on recognition and measurement of impairment of financial assets. Most of the support for financial assets is leading to financial assets in government's balance sheet, and therefore these standards have to be followed when it comes to the monitoring of impairment of financial assets. And with that, I'm finishing, and I'm happy to answer questions later on.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I would like to invite Livia to share with us European Union response to COVID-19, government accounting and EPSAS perspective, EU member states experience, as well as some benefits of using harmonized accrual accounting. Go ahead, Livia.
Oops. Can you see my presentation?
We can see it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dmitry, and thank you all PULSAR team. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone. It is a pleasure to join this PULSAR workshop and exchange on good practices preparing financial statements and consolidations in time of COVID-19. As you know, a pandemic started as a global health crisis, but it is turning into unprecedented socio-economic crisis. Today, I will say a few words first on a general overview of EU response to COVID-19. We will see a slide on government accounting and EPSAS, then some examples of EU member states' experiences and benefits of harmonized accrual accounting. The European Commission is working on all fronts to contain the spread of the coronavirus, support national health system, protect and save lives, and counter the socio-economic impacts of the pandemic with measures at both national and EU levels. I will not go into much details here, but maybe to mention that Commission is mobilizing the EU budget to leverage and redirect investments where they are needed. To kickstart the European recovery, European Commission is proposing 2.4 trillion recovery plan to deliver a more sustainable, digital and fair Europe. We at the EPSAS team also felt a need to respond to this pandemic crisis, and the Eurostat Commission paper, which was prepared by our contractor PricewaterhouseCoopers on government accounting, EPSAS, and supporting the COVID-19 response. This paper reflects on the link between public accounting and the wide range of important response measures put in place by many EU member states. As we know, high quality information is more than ever needed for effective policy making and financial planning. Greater transparency and comparability are also needed for proper use of public money. The pressure on public sector budgets brings some new challenges that is vital to ensure the funds are properly used. Increased government spending may also affect the capacity to meet their social, environmental, or financial obligation in future, bringing to the table question on the long-term sustainability of public finances. Government interventions can be categorized in various ways from many different angles. And for today's presentation, I used the same grouping as we could already see in Thomas' presentations, summarizing some of the main types of public programs in response to COVID-19 crisis. So first group, direct government expenditures. Governments across the EU have increased the transfer of resources to help the society limit the public health and economic consequences on COVID-19 pandemic. Income of individuals has largely been supported by EU governments through measures that have facilitated the access to social benefits and limiting the spread of COVID-19 through testing and provision on protective equipment. Second group are tax-related measures. Governments offer the delays to the tax payment deadlines and various forms of tax reduction or exemptions. And businesses can ask for additional support for the tax authorities regarding their tax debts. Governments also provide support to businesses, to the targeted group of entities and individuals in forms of grants, loans, equity investment, and public guarantee schemes. I will come back to this later in the presentation. And last group, support for financial systems. The European Central Bank put in place a set of monetary policy and banking supervision measures to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the euro area economy and to support European citizens. Such measures include repurchasing bonds and other assets-backed securities or lowering interest rates. Next three slides show some concrete examples of EU member states' experiences. First, support through social benefits. Several countries have taken measures to extend and increase the access to unemployment benefits. For example, to those who were not entitled before, such as workers whose contract finished after their trial period, or extension of the period in which benefits are received, or relaxation of the eligibility for unemployment allowance. And income support via wage subsidies, supporting employers with negative impact of COVID-19 by providing percentage of the wage for eligible employees or compensation to cover wages costs incurred during certain periods after the affected by quarantine or emergency measures. Using harmonized public sector accounting framework for cash transfers and other benefits enables consistency in reporting by member states on large amounts of government expenditures. Consistent data can also explain the characteristics of the social benefit schemes and the demographic, economic, and other external factors. In order to assess the effectiveness of these measures and keep government expenditure and deficit under control, governments needs a reporting framework which captures and measures the relevant financial and non-financial data. Now some experiences on tax-related measures. In most countries, businesses have been automatically granted temporary extensions of the deadline to file tax returns and pay taxes. Taxes are the major source of revenue for many governments. Therefore, data needs to be reliable. High-quality accrual accounting provides better and timely information regarding revenue from taxes, as when to recognize revenue and for what amount. Due to COVID-19 crisis, the related government measures currently have a major negative impact on the source of tax revenue. And accrual accounting requires governments to assess the recoverability of their outstanding tax claims under prevailing economic conditions. Support for businesses. Many governments have provided grants to selected beneficiaries to support individual self-employed entrepreneurs and businesses. The measures have a budgetary impact that may span over several years, and both the European Commission and member states can provide financial assistance in the form of loans granted on favorable terms for businesses. Accrual accounting enhancing transparency and accountability and provides accurate and reliable information on grants and loans portfolio. It also enhances recovery management for grants and assesses the credit risk associated with the loans that is then reflected in financial statements. Such information can be used for strategic decision-making, monitoring, and surveillance at both national and EU level. Final two slides show some concrete benefits of harmonized accrual accounting, especially during crisis. Despite we are just at the beginning, it is envisaged that COVID-19 pandemic may have profound and long-lasting impacts on government finances. More than ever, governments must take the right choices based on relevant and insightful information. Robust and modern information systems are needed to support scrutiny of government spending and government ability to take the right decisions on the provided measures. Governments need to understand the full long-term economic impact of their decisions on financial performance, financial position, and cash flows. Transparent accrual-based financial statements reflect true long-term implication of political decisions. Adoption of high-quality accrual accounting also lays the basis for developing better management information systems, which should contribute to better decision-making and better use of public money. Just to conclude, it is very important to deliver a better public services and to achieve sustainable public finances. Decisions made now and in the coming months will be some of the most important made in generations. They will affect people all around the world for years to come. It is therefore imperative that governments making those decisions throughout the crisis have access to the best available information to support decision-making during and after the crisis. And some useful links. First one is on the paper on COVID-19 that I mentioned earlier in the presentations, and other links where you can find all our technical papers and analysis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Livia. Our next speaker is Anton Dubovik, who is going to share with us Russian Federation experience in addressing financial reporting concerns in times of COVID.
Добрый день, коллеги. Меня слышно?
Слышно.
Dear colleagues, good afternoon. Can you hear me? We can hear you, but we cannot see your presentation yet. Well, as long as you can hear me.
Dear participants who are listening in English, I would like to again ask you, if you have not done so already.
Дорогие участники, кто еще не переключился на английский язык, пожалуйста, переключитесь, потому что господин Дубовик будет говорить по-русски. Вам нужно в нижнем левом углу нажать кнопку Floor и переключиться, соответственно, с трибуны спикера на язык вашего предпочтения, в данном случае английский. Спасибо. Good afternoon. Can you see my presentation now? Yes. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. This is a very unusual topic. 1 year ago, we could not even imagine that we would discuss issues of financial reporting in conditions of pandemics. Now it's reality. Things are okay, more or less, but we have to do our work. We need to discuss all issues related to preparing financial reporting in these difficult times. Of course, my colleagues before me, Livia and Thomas, already explained part of issues, and they're classic in nature. These are forms of financial support from the government, but I would like to share the experience of Russian Federation and to discuss some other issues. Pictures that everyone recognizes now. These are images of coronavirus and conditions of our lives. I will tell you that Russian Federation, in matter of financial reporting, did not have any issues for 2019. Financial reporting for 2019 was before pandemics kicked in, and so we were able to present government reporting for 2019, and then all the events started. So I'd like to talk about financial reporting for 2020, what issues we have to resolve. First of all, we need to understand that pandemic remains, but what's the problem? What are the challenges that we have for the system of governance? This is not first pandemic on the planet. We had pandemics 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 10 years ago, just recently. So this pandemic is different because it's pandemic in nature, it's global in nature, and it impacts the system of governance.
What are the objectives we have to achieve given the challenges for the public administration? These objectives are very extensive, and there is one instrument to achieve them. This is the foundation. This is the financial reporting as the instrument of control. But in the period of pandemic, we have issues related to the fact that procedures of consolidation of financial reporting cannot be traditional. We have to adjust them. We have to re-engineer all the processes. And when I talk about financial reporting, it is not reporting for itself. We have to get something as a result, and what we get should be in line with our objectives. And our objectives were the understanding or establishment of some system of financial monitoring, or the monitoring system based on financial reporting. We need to see what's going on in the economy. First of all, the pandemic for the system of public administration. I have noticed here that we have seen the increase of budgetary expenditure. This is related to support measures undertaken like grants, subsidies, and social support. We have also decline in fiscal revenue, which is one of the negative aspects of the situation. This is related to reduction of business activity. The economy is frozen, and for us and for some other countries, the oil market situation is important, and at the moment now it's more or less stabilized, but in the beginning of the pandemic there were strong shocks, and the shocks impacted our revenues. All the financial risks have materialized, and also we need to remember that for public administration we have seen the reduced manageability, in the sense that many staff members from the public administration moved to remote way of work, or they are in furloughs and they don't perform their regular functions. For these situations, in order to resolve the issues facing us in the public administration system, the most important instrument is financial reporting. Earlier, about 1 or 2 years ago, financial reporting was reviewed from the perspective of some scholarly work performed by accountants for auditors, and auditors evaluated the work of accountants. But now the situation changed significantly. Financial reporting should be answering a number of questions. And these questions are reflected at the slide. The current financial position, what are the provisions, what are the assets, what are the liabilities. The financial reporting should give the answer to the question on the financial measures adopted by the government for stabilizing the situation, on leveling the negative impacts, on mitigating the impacts, and also quantitative characteristics should lead to specific results of adopted measures. This is the first half of my slides that are related to the understanding of what we would like to get from the financial reporting. We have the pandemic, we have some negative impacts on the economy and public administration system. No doubt about that. One of the instruments to be able to respond and to manage the situation is the financial reporting. From the perspective of Russian Federation, how we organize financial reporting, and we have quite ordinary story. We have monthly reporting, which was always collected based on accounting, based on accounts, based on budget classification. We focused on stocks, flows, and budget execution. And all entities were reporting. When we move into mode of financial reporting in the conditions of pandemic, the situation changes dramatically. No one is interested in financial data 1 month ago. We have the issue of having information here and now, today, to understand some financial parameters. So, in part, we moved to weekly financial reports in some areas, a disclosure of information. We disclose information of accountants based on accounts, based on codes of budgets classification. Another important element is management classification, the measures adopted by the government in some area. This may be subsidies for individuals or subsidies to the economy, support for some industries or financial system. This aspect becomes very important. Besides classical accounting data, it is very important for us now to understand how specific measures of the government have the impacts and consequences. And the most important, I call this slide the striking the balance between needs and opportunities. In essence, in the past life, so to say, the loads, the reporting loads, the loads related to preparing reporting was much lower, and it covered all the entities of the public administration. Now this load increased in terms of disclosure of information, but at the same time we realized that most staff members are working remotely, and as a consequence, one of the solutions we developed, most of the information is prepared by the Treasury or by the Treasury jointly with line ministries, which use their IT systems and accounting systems to provide data for preparing current indicators. This slide demonstrates the situation we're ended up in. Now, no one is interested in the funds approved in the budget for some measures. What was the execution of cash component? What are the cash flows? We have more requirements from the government, from consumers of the information in order to understand specific results. And this is what we have discussed earlier today. Besides financial data, what is very important is the data of the specific results. For example, procurement of medical equipment performed by the Ministry of Health. Earlier, we mentioned that some funds were allocated, this was executed, the contracts were signed, the money was paid, and this finishes the financial reporting. But now, financial reporting formulates the volumes of liabilities, the actually signed contracts in order to see the procurement procedure going on. And also the specific result, the management reporting, is combined with financial indicators. We have to see how much we had to procure and how much was actually procured. This is the reporting on specific areas, which is prepared now in weekly regime. I'd like to note that we have a number of difficulties and issues facing us in the times of pandemic. First of all, we understand that changing the system of reporting, switching to the operations in these conditions requires some regulatory control. So the standards, procedures, the approval of documents and standards, the explanations, they do not work. So what is required is switching to quicker organizational solutions. Remote operations have strong impacts on performance and communication, and delays in document flow. So many business processes require digitalization. As soon as we have undigitalized processes, it's very difficult in current conditions to get some information. And naturally, technological support, IT systems cannot be switched over 1 month from one condition into another condition. It requires some customization, some adjustment in the procedures. The information is required anyway, the life doesn't stop. So we understand that in terms of issues and challenges facing us, these three components going forwards will play a very strong role. I'm sure that this is not the last story related to the need for quick response to some changes. In this case, we talk about pandemic. So at the level of the government, we have established, on the basis of financial reporting, we have established forward-looking system based on financial reporting. This system allows to monitor the current situation and to provide financial information and management information for the governments, which is very important at the moment. Once again, it doesn't matter for the citizen, for the individual. for the legal entity, for the system, it doesn't matter how much funds were allocated in the budget, how the budget is executed, what are the liabilities, risks, and provisions. It is important to have clear understanding of the measures adopted by the government and how these measures were executed. The money was allocated in the budget to buy or to pay out subsidies to unemployed. The subsidies should be paid out directly to the recipients, and all the process becomes uninteresting. In our case, we switched our focus to achieving specific results, to linkage the financial resources which were allocated. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'm ready to answer.
Спасибо, Anton. Now we are going
Thank you very much, Anton.
PULSAR FinCoP members, Hanna and Ludmila, who will briefly share with us the experience of Horvatia and Ukraine. We are running a little bit late, colleagues, so please try to be as brief as possible. And also let me mention that I will also have to disconnect in few minutes, but Arman and Srini will take over the facilitation of the event. Hanna, go ahead, the floor is yours.
Dear Hanna, can you hear us?
Hanna, Ludmila. We can start with Ludmila if Hanna is having... Oh, Hanna, we can see you.
Hanna, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you see my screen?
No, we see your video.
Just a video? Just a second.
I will now disconnect Livia and Anton. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I'll have to disconnect you from the screen so we can accept Arman. Thank you for your presentations, Anton, Livia.
Is it okay now?
Yes, Hanna, give me a minute, but please stay tuned, Anton, Livia, for the question and answer session. Go ahead, Hanna.
Hello, everybody.
Hanna, could you please...
Just a second to turn off Croatian. Just a second.
And
the full screen for the presentation.
Yes, of course. Okay. Can you see it now? Yes?
Yes, but no full screen.
No full screen?
Presentation mode.
Yes? Is it okay?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the PULSAR team to invite me to this event, and thank you in the name of the Republic of Croatia to let us show you our case in financial reporting and consolidation in times of COVID. So just as an introductory slide, I wanted to share with you the situation prior to COVID-19 in Croatia. So Croatia had a GDP growth that was accelerating with a growth rate of 2.9 in 2019. The employment was low, registering at 6.9 in 2019, and we had the government budget surplus of 0.9. So the situation looked pretty good, and we were were all ready to hit even better scores in 2020. Thing that is very important for Croatia is that Croatia's economy strongly relies on the tourism sector, and this represents around 20 to 25% of the GDP. As you can tell, this was very difficult for us when the situation with coronavirus happened, and we need to take a lot of measures to overcome this. We had not only one crisis happening in spring this year, we had unfortunately two crises happening at the same time. We had a partial lockdown of the population due to COVID-19, and there were numerous epidemiological measures implemented, including social isolation measures, which had a significant adverse effect on the Republic of Croatia's economic activities. Almost all economic activities in the Republic of Croatia have been reduced or suspended, of course, hitting some areas even stronger than the others. Unfortunately, at the same time, we had a natural disaster on March 22nd. During the partial lockdown of our society, we had an earthquake of 5.3 magnitude, the strongest one in the last 140 years, that struck Zagreb, that is the capital of Croatia, and damaged a lot of buildings and injured dozens of people. So we had two crises happening parallel in spring 2020 that were very demanding for our government. So the measures had to be taken very fast, and they had to be very effective. So there were a number of measures that were adapted to help the economy and to help the public finance due to the COVID-19 pandemic and due to the Zagreb earthquake. The measures were divided in separate groups. First measures were dedicated to functioning of the public finance system and the sustainability of public service financing. So these were the main tasks happening in the Ministry of Finance. The second measures were the group of the measures that help to preserve the jobs. There were horizontal measures that are mainly measures in a tax system. Special measures aimed at micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, which were very much affected by the COVID-19. Loans from the Croatian Bank for Reconstruction and Development and commercial banks. And of course, we had special accounts where we collected donations to assist with relief efforts related to the earthquake and to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of these measures were already mentioned by Livia, since Livia's presentation had an overview of all the EU countries, and since Croatia is one of the EU countries, some of the measures are overlapping. First measures were the measures for functioning of the public finance system and the sustainability of public service financing. As I already mentioned, these are the measures that were provided by the Ministry of Finance. First thing was the amendments of the law on budget execution. This is a law that goes together with the budget for every year. With these amendments, we enabled additional government borrowing, as well as additional borrowing by extra budgetary users, such as social funds, above the previously set limits. This needed to be done with the consent of the government of the Republic of Croatia. Second thing that the amendments provided were the reallocation in the state budget higher than it is set in the Budget Act with the consent of government, but only and exclusively if related to coronavirus crisis. So the percentage of the reallocation was higher than one stated in the State Budget Act, but only for the activities related to coronavirus crisis. And in the end, of course, we had the amendments to the budget. This happened in May 2020. Here it was taking into account the negative impact of the pandemic on economic activity, the adopted measures to assist the economy, as well as the expected decline in the revenues. It is very important to note that the expenditures of the state budget in these amendments to the budget stayed the same, so at the same level as originally planned for 2020, while significant reallocations were made in order to ensure financial funds needed for the measures to address the negative impact of the coronavirus pandemic in the economy, but also in the health care sector. The second measure for functioning of the public finance was interest-free loans to local government and social funds. Since there were measures of abolishment of the direct taxes, the revenues of the local and regional self-governments were smaller or zero. So the Republic of Croatia decided to provide interest-free loan funds to bridge this situation to the local and regional self-government units and to social funds. Second thing was that the government had the decision which determines the measures limiting the use of funds from all sources of financing planned in the state budget for 2020. Of course, this decision was in place only until we had the amendments to the budget. So this was like some emergency measure that took place just right after the lockdown, and it was the main goal was to make budgetary users rationalize their expenditures and rationalize public spending in general without affecting healthcare and social services. For example, budgetary users were prohibited from new employment, and they could assume only those obligations and execute the expenditures for the performance of their basic tasks and functions. We had also aid for job preservation and some horizontal measures. Aid for job preservation were dedicated in the most vulnerable sectors. In Croatia, these were mainly tourist sector and also things like restaurants or shops and things like that. We had a support measure for the state to finance the cost of minimum wage in the amount of, let's say, 500 euros. That was in March, and later that was extended to the, let's say, 550 euros. Pension and health insurance were paid by the state budget and not the employers. All these measures were shown in the state budget since we have a lot of classification that can help us track these costs. So we had special activities within the organizational classification to track all these costs and to see the fiscal impact of these costs on the state budget for 2020. So for sure, all these measures will not only be seen in the budget for 2020, but also in the budget for 2021 and maybe even further. So all the classification that we are using in our everyday life in the budget really were very helpful in bridging this situation with the COVID-19 to track all these extra expenses that were happening. In Croatia, we didn't have some extra funds outside the budget. All these expenditures were inside the budget, and all these payments were happening inside the budget, divided through different budgetary users like Ministry of Health, Unemployment Agency, Ministry of Interior, etc., Interior Affairs, etc. Horizontal measures were very important measures when looking at the revenue side of the budget. So we had the deferment and write-off of payments of direct taxes and contributions to entrepreneurs with business difficulties. So when looking at these measures, these are the measures that are directly affecting the employers, but also have to be taken into account that when looking at the revenue side of the budget and when looking at the revenue side of the budgets of the local units that are users of these funds. Measures aimed at micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises and loans from the Croatian Bank for Development and commercial banks. These are some measures that are funded with the support of European funds, and not only measures that include a government. We have to say that addition of these measures were also measures adopted by commercial banks, where they had a series of measures that provide for entrepreneurs and citizens with a moratorium, reprogramming on the payment of credit obligations, but also new loans for liquidity and working capital. At the end, I must say that all these measures will need to be tracked not only in the budget, but also in the financial statements. And in regards in the financial statements, as we already heard in previous presentations, we had to see the situation and take into account the special time that we are all in together. So we extend the deadline for submission of annual financial statements for 2019 for entrepreneurs and also for consolidation. So it wasn't anymore the April, but it was the June deadline. And we also extend the deadline for submission of quarterly financial statements for the budgetary users at the state level and at the local level. So at first, the deadline was postponed until further notice. And later, when the situation was a little bit better and we all came back to work from home, we postponed the deadline to May. We also provided a lot of special instructions to our budgetary users on the state level and on the local level on how to record all the measures that were new and that were special in times of COVID and that have to do with all the flows, regardless of is it money flows or is it some good flows that happened because of the special situation that was regarding COVID, or in the case of Croatia, also the earthquake. Thank you for your attention. If there will be any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Hanan. Now I would like to pass the floor to Ludmila, and just to note to all the participants that we may extend by 15-20 minutes the event, so providing also opportunity for a short session for question and answer session. Ludmila, can you please unmute?
Здравствуйте, коллеги. Меня слышно?
Dear colleagues, can you hear me now? Let me turn on the presentation. Can you see the presentation now? Thank you very much. Thank you. First of all, for the opportunity to meet with you virtually, of course. Unfortunately, that we could not see each other face to face in reality, to share not just problems, but also achievements. But this is good platform that WorldBank is using right now. Good opportunity to review situation of every country, even though regime is closed, every country's particular, but like every other country, Ukraine was not ready to all these problems, pandemics. And it's true when government, when the leadership of the nation understood the depth of what threat is out there, real threat to people, because human life, human resources are most important. And we tried to allocate all funds in the budget to direct into the fund to fight the pandemics. First of all, I'd like to point out that comprehensive measures from the leadership of our nation include change of legislation. There were certain amendments provided to the law on state budget for 2020, where all possible resources were relocated to create this fund to fight COVID, and then changes were made to certain laws, including to the law on accounting concerning the time of submission of financial reporting, audited financial reporting if it's envisioned so by the law, because it had to happen by 1st of June 2020. This timeline was delayed for the public sector, and the distributors of public funds have submitted reports on time. Then further deadline was not moved. Commercial sectors have submitted their reports on time to statistics and fiscal authorities. The only things that have not happened for joint stock companies. We have not received consolidated reporting approved by the supervisory board and audited. And then commercial companies that are in state property, as it happens in other countries for the time of crisis. Mainly this would be the service, economic services provided, but they were stopped for the time of COVID. These would be some municipal companies. We are looking at financial reporting as a tool, very necessary tool for informing the public. Now it became more important than before, and we have heard from many participants, this is not just about numbers and information. This is information to be used, because that's when we learn the sources of funds. These are not just money from state budget. There are humanitarian funds, there are grants and charity submitted into the budget, especially that's happening at municipal level, where charitable organizations are helping hospitals, and we need to properly account for and report these funds separately. Another very important instrument, that's information about activities in view of effectiveness, how are goals reached. In situation of COVID-19, the budget allocates certain funds according to targeted programs. There is resource, there are targets, and there should be reporting on how the targets and indicators are achieved. And that's why accounting reports and financial reporting provides timely information on how all funds are used, including COVID fund. Next issue, we're talking about financial discipline. We're not talking about violations. Situation is critical, so it should not be about violations, but financial discipline should be in place. Audit, control from audit service, from accounting chamber, and that's based on accounting and financial reporting. Next, information about the funds received by state-owned companies, because not only government institutions are receiving funds, but also state-owned companies like healthcare companies or state industry that produces medical equipment. They receive funds, they need to be reporting because government also invests into the equity of these companies. Information about level of resources necessary to continue operation. We need to understand the activity, not just in time of quarantine, but post-quarantine, and how the funds should be best allocated or reallocated, how economy of the nation should be built based on necessary macroeconomic indicators, based on real availability of funds, either own funds or borrowed funds. Another purpose of financial reporting is information about quality assessment of governance, how the government fulfills its obligations in general, and how each unit of the government does it. Next slide, I will not go into detail because many colleagues already shared what information we can draw from financial reporting. The next slide shows information about, just like I said, the Parliament has created certain state program as part of state budget. The mechanism of using these funds set by the government and control for allocation of funds of money from this fund going to all ministries and agencies is done by those respective agencies, and there is also preventive control done by State Treasury Service, because it is very aware in every detail about procurement program, both at central level and regional levels, because in our country, we are going through decentralization reform where the central government transfers powers to local level. Municipalities are reformed and there are agencies of state treasury created on regional and local level. As previous speakers already said, how the funds are used for healthcare sector to increase salaries of medical workers, to provide equipment, to finance companies that produce medical equipment and medicine, social safety, providing funds to pension fund. Because at the time of COVID, there was one-time assistance, financial assistance provided to pensioners. Also, financial aid was given to citizens that need such help. And that was the work of social services. Also, financial help was provided to Social Security Fund for cases of unemployment, but also cases of medical leave. We have not mentioned education here, but that pandemic time coincided with exams, with general testing for high school students, for university students, to provide financing in transfer of students' activity from face-to-face studies to virtual studies. All financial consequences were covered by these funds as well. Also, funds were allocated to provide financial assistance to state-owned enterprises and individual entrepreneurs who would like to receive a loan to support their business and to develop it. How did COVID impact financial reporting? Of course, in Ukraine, we have already electronic financial reporting system in our government, and that saved us actually, because last year, Ukraine has moved to single chart of accounts for all users of budget funds, but also additional funds and local budgets. And that allowed for the Treasury to work in one electronic system. Because of this system, we did not delay submitting reports by the distributors of public finances.
Составление электронной отчетности мы попытались сделать.
We tried to show how the system for electronic reporting works. And accountants from the public agency can file this to the internet using the electronic signature. They file the reports into the system of electronic reporting, to the system of distance servicing of the Treasury. The database is created, and after validation, information goes to the storage, to the repository of e-reporting, and to the automated system e-Treasury, where the data is synchronized, and after the reporting is filed, it is signed by the digital signature. It is reviewed online. It is reviewed by the public agencies which manage public funds. This is not the topic for today's discussion, but we have serious advantage that we saved time and human resources for consolidation of reporting the level of the public agency and the Treasury. Now everything is done online. There is automated consolidation, and at the level of the Treasury, the reporting is consolidated for the local budgets and national budget, the reporting of the public agencies and local authorities, and consolidated to reporting of the state-targeted funds. This is all consolidated into the unified consolidated reporting. After that, the reporting is disclosed. Besides the information which is always available at the website of the Ministry of Finance and at the website of the State Treasury of Ukraine, the reporting is publicized online on a permanent basis at the websites of the administrators of the public funds. This is done once a year by the 1st of June. The budget execution reporting is published by the Treasury by June the 1st. As operational information on all payments and all agreements and all contracts and all agreements related to tender committees and transparency of procurement procedures. This is published at the Single Government Open Data web portal, data.gov.ua. You can enter this portal anytime, and then you can see all financial transactions happening, including transactions on fighting with COVID. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Ludmila. Thank you for your very interesting information on the countries. Now I pass the floor to Pastor Mate, who is the core chair of EduCoP for questions and answer session.
Patrick, I believe we have lost you. Teddy, can you please accept Patrick? Thanks.
Thank you, Aman. I would like to thank all the presenters for these very educative presentations. We do have one question that we have received from Ronald, who is the Accountant General of Costa Rica. The question, I think, goes to Thomas Muller, and it reads as follows. How can we identify when a non-cash generating asset has an impairment in its service potential as a result of the pandemic? I would request Thomas to answer this question. I think it was directed to him.
Yes, thanks, Patrick. Actually, this is a very good question because for cash generating assets, it's very easy. You do a projection of the cash inflows which are related to the asset, and that provides you with the fair value, which is then compared with the carrying amount. In case of non-cash generating assets, it's not as easy as it is. So the standard provides kind of multiple options to kind of come to a comparative amount for the carrying amount. The main approach would be to kind of do an assessment of the remaining service potential embedded in the non-cash generating asset, and if available, to come to a conclusion of what would be the amount to be paid to kind of rebuild or repurchase the service amount, the embodied service potential in this asset. So it's kind of like a rebuild or recover approach in order to get a comparative amount for the service potential which is embodied in the asset. Is that answering the question?
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. We do have another question from Tatiana. Maybe Terry, you can help to interpret it.
Patrick, Tatiana is saying thank you to the presenters. Thank you for this event, and saying that this event was very interesting and useful.
Okay, we don't have any other further questions. Probably I would hand it over to Aman given the time overshoot.
Thank you, Patrick. I would like just to use this opportunity again to thank our distinguished speakers for bringing quite a very broad perspective of this key topic on consolidation and again financial reporting and putting accountants at the core. So it's not only doctors these days who are really on the front line, but it's clearly accountants has a major role to play for better transparency, better accountability, of course, information for decision making, high quality, which was reflected and reiterated by our many speakers, and including how to manage the debt and how to work, how to be transparent. And the number which Ed just indicated, 100% in some countries or many countries, the doubling of the debt level, that makes a major responsibility on our current governments to be open and transparent and to engage with the countries, with the citizens. And the other aspects also was very interesting to reflect on these, about also the tax and how we accrue on the accrual basis, how do we account for the taxation and the impact. So all of those just make it also the note that we will need to look into the financial, but also non-financial information. And when we talk about financial, we again talk about IPSAS as a key reference point for financial statements preparation, accrual basis IPSAS, which is the basis for which provides further trust and reliability. So just closing this event, on behalf of PULSAR team, I would like just to thank all the speakers and participants of FinCoP, of EduCoP, all the guests who joined from the Latin America and other countries, regions. And of course, I would like to note our donors. It's Austrian Ministry of Finance and SECO who are supporting and funding PULSAR program. And thanks to them, we have this program with the WorldBank up and running. Thanks to everybody. Please stay safe and see you next time on our next seat. Thank you.